What camera lens should I buy? That is probably the second most asked question in photography, right behind what camera body should I buy? It's not an easy decision. There's a lot of lenses out there with a lot of different prices, and some of the terminology can be kind of complicated, so that's what this video is for. I'm going to walk you through the terminology, the numbers, and what all of that information means, so you can feel confident in buying what might be your first camera lens. So let's get right into it. So one of the most important things to make sure that you do is check the mount of the lens that you're going to buy. Make sure it's the right mount that fits your camera body. If you have a Nikon that's an F mount, make sure you're buying an F mount lens that fits on that camera body. Otherwise, the lens just won't fit. If you have a Sony body that is an A mount, that you're buying an A mount lens, because different companies like Sony, like Voigtlander, like Sigma make multiple different kinds of mounts for lenses to fit on multiple kinds of bodies, so make sure you have the right mount to fit your camera body. Another point I want to bring up is a native versus a non-native lens. That means a lens that is made by the same company as your camera body. So if you're buying a Nikon camera body, a native lens would be a Nikon lens. If you have a Canon camera body, a native lens would be that Canon lens that goes with it. That's the same mount that matches it. Now I recommend, if you're just starting out, make sure you buy a native lens. That's probably the best option because it's going to work the best. You're not going to need an adapter. You're not going to need a speed booster or anything. That lens is going to go right on that camera body, and that's going to be the best option for you to start out with. So you might be curious, why would someone even buy a non-native lens? Why would I buy a camera body that is made by Canon and then a camera lens that is made by Nikon and use those together? Well, you'll start to notice as you progress in your photo career that you'll start to like certain lenses better than others. You might like the contrast of one lens, maybe that Nikon makes, over the contrast of a lens made by Canon. That is absolutely up to you, and it's all subjective. Over the years, you'll start to see that you collect different kinds of lenses because you start to see they make different kinds of pictures and they have different looks to them. So it's not a bad thing to adapt a lens to a camera that doesn't fit. You'll just need to spend that extra money in an adapter. And you'll also notice that camera bodies, every 6 months, your camera body will probably be out of date and replaced by something new. Lenses, not so much. They tend to last a couple years, and they're pretty expensive. So you'll notice a lot of people like to collect lenses, and that's an awesome thing to do. I do it. I have tons of lenses made by tons of different manufacturers, and I have little adapters that put them on different camera bodies. So the next thing you want to look for when buying a lens is the focal length. What is the focal length? Well, it's a number usually measured in millimeters. You'll see 24 to 70 millimeters or 200 millimeters. That's the focal length, and that means the point inside your lens where all the light converges into one point and then separates and hits your sensor. The distance between that convergence of light and your sensor or your film is your focal length. Now, that's really not what you're thinking about when you're buying a lens. When you're thinking about focal length, you're thinking about how zoomed in the lens is. If you have a 14 millimeter lens, that's going to be a very wide, very zoomed out lens. If you have, let's say, a 200 millimeter or a 300 millimeter lens, that's going to be very tight and zoomed in. How are lenses categorized? They're usually categorized by their focal length and divided up into 3 or 4 different categories. Now, we're going to be talking about 35 millimeter lenses right now, or what a lens would look like on a full frame camera sensor. So, between 0 and 35 millimeters is going to be what's considered a wide angle lens. I'm not 100% sure what the widest lens ever made was, so we're just going to say 0 for the sake of this graph. Now, between 35 millimeters and about 85 millimeters, that's going to be considered the normal range, or they'll call it a normal lens. And then 85 millimeters on to about 200 is considered telephoto, and 200 plus, maybe a 1600 millimeter lens, that's going to be considered a super telephoto. Let's break down some of these categories of lenses and what they're used for. A wide angle lens is going to be great for landscape photography, for architecture. Because it's so wide, it has a very deep depth of field, meaning that everything in your shot is probably going to be in focus. There's also fisheyes versus non-fisheye. I'm sure you've seen those skateboard videos from the 90s that are the big circle, everything is all distorted and bulged out. That's a fisheye lens. Not all wide angles our fisheye lens. So if you're not looking for that bulgy fisheye look, make sure you're getting a non-fisheye wide-angle lens. Probably the most popular category is a normal lens or a standard lens. It's usually the lens that's going to come in a camera kit if your camera body comes with a lens. Almost always a normal lens. Great for portraits, great for that medium amount of depth of field, and it's a great versatile lens that you can do all sorts of things with it. You just slap it on your camera body and go shoot. So the next category, I'm going to combine telephoto and super telephoto together because they kind of have the same function. They're usually used for wildlife or something really far away, maybe airplanes, birds, animals, you name it. They're also great for sports when you can't be right up close to the action, but you want to have a very compressed image and shallow depth of field. That's exactly what a telephoto is great for. So the next thing I want to talk about is your aperture. When you're buying a lens, it's extremely important to know what the maximum and minimum aperture of your lens is going to be. So if you see two different cameras that look very similar, let's say this 70 to 200 Canon and this 70 to 200 Canon, and you see a huge price difference, that probably means they have different apertures. So one might open to 2.8 f and one might only open to 4 f. Your aperture is the little iris inside of your camera lens that lets in light. So obviously the one that can open a little bit larger and let more light into your camera, that's the one you're going to want to go with if you can afford it. But the bigger apertures, they can be expensive. You can see the big price difference. So lenses are also broken down into two more categories: zoom lenses and prime lenses. Zoom lenses are lenses that you can do just that. You can zoom in. You don't have to change lenses to change your focal length. An example of a zoom lens might be a 14 to 24 millimeter, where the widest possible shot you could take on that lens is a 14, and then you can zoom in just a little bit to 24 millimeters. Where prime lenses, you're stuck with that one focal length, a 50 millimeter, a 200 millimeter, etc. You are stuck, and if you want to zoom in, you're going to have to change lenses. So what lens should you get? Should you get a zoom or a prime? Let's break them down into the pros and cons of each and see which one would fit best for you. So the biggest pro of a zoom lens is that they're versatile. It's so easy just to zoom with the lens attached to your camera. You don't have to take it off to be able to zoom. That means you're going to be able to shoot action a lot quicker than having to switch lenses. What are some of the downfalls or cons of zoom lenses? Well, they're going to be heavier because there's more glass and more elements inside that have to work together to be able to zoom and keep your image in focus. Zoom lenses also typically have a higher f number, which means they let in a little bit less light than a prime lens of the same focal length. You might also have to deal with chromatic aberration. Have you ever seen those little red or green glowy things on the outsides of your image that shouldn't belong there? That's chromatic aberration, and that means towards the edge of your lens, some of the light is being broken apart, and that usually comes with lower quality glass or lower quality zoom lenses. Another downfall of cheap zoom lenses is the variable aperture when you zoom. Your lens might say f4 to 5.6. That means that when your zoom lens is as wide as it can possibly be, it'll be f4, but as you zoom in, your aperture closes down to 5.6, which means that the more you zoom in, the less light that you're letting in to hit your sensor. So what are some of the advantages of buying a prime lens? Well, usually prime lenses weigh less since they're only dealing with that one focal length. They're usually smaller and weigh a lot less than a zoom lens. And believe me, that weight will add up when you're carrying a bunch of lenses around in a backpack. Another advantage is the low f number, or the ability to open your aperture larger than most zoom lenses and let more light into your camera sensor. That's always a great thing to have. Another great thing about prime lenses is there's usually no vignetting. That manufacturer worked really hard to get the most out of that one focal length, so you won't see those dark edges around the side of your frame that you see in a lot of zoom lenses. So what are some of the cons or downfalls of buying a prime lens? Well, the biggest and most obvious one is going to be that you can't zoom. In order to zoom, you're going to have to switch lenses, or pro tip here, zoom with your feet and just get closer. But another one of the downfalls with zooming by changing lenses means that every time you take your lens off of your camera body, you're exposing your sensor on a mirrorless camera or your mirror on a DSLR. You're exposing it to dust and all the contaminants that are in your environment. So every time you have to take off your lens, and change it, that's more stuff that you're getting into your camera body that you don't want. Another problem that will come with some cheaper prime lenses if you're really trying to save money, it's called breathing. And breathing isn't so noticeable in photography, but it's gonna hurt you in videography. And what breathing is when you're focusing in and out, you're gonna notice that your lens zooms in and out just a little bit. It's barely noticeable. It's only a couple millimeters in focal length, but it can be very noticeable in video. So that is all for this video. Thank you guys for joining me. I hope you can take something away from this video and you learned a little bit of terminology, what some of those numbers mean, and you're a lot more confident in buying your next lens. So if you like this video, make sure you hit that like button, share this video with a friend that might be buying their next lens. Maybe you can help them out just a little bit. And as always, subscribe down below for more videos just like this. And until next time, get out and go shoot.